My mother, my father, my aunt, my 2 cousins. The people who sat around my grandmother's kitchen table every Sunday and told me, in various ways, that I was lucky to have them. I believed that for a long time. That's the part that still gets to me sitting here now, 8 years later. Not the leaving, the believing. I grew up in a small town outside of Sudbury, Ontario. The kind of place where everyone knows your last name and your grandmother's last name, and has an opinion about both. My dad worked at the mill until it cut hours. My mom cleaned houses on the north side of town 3 days a week. We weren't poor in the way that people talk about on the news. We had heat, we had food, but there was always a conversation happening underneath every other conversation, and that conversation was always about money. Who had it? Who needed it? Who owed what to whom? I was the oldest of 3. That meant something in our house. It meant I helped clear the table before anyone asked. It meant I watched my younger brother on days when my mom had back-to-back shifts. It meant that when my cousin's car broke down 40 minutes away, it was my name my aunt called, not my parents', because she knew I'd come. I always came. I was good at that. Showing up. I thought for most of my childhood and into my early 20s that this was just what family meant. You showed up. You helped. You didn't keep score. The problem was that I was the only one who wasn't keeping score. I found out how much I was actually worth to them on a Tuesday afternoon in February. I was 24. I'd been working at a dental clinic for 2 years as an administrative coordinator, saving carefully, putting away a little from every paycheck. Not a lot. I was renting a basement apartment, paying off my student line of credit, buying my own groceries for the first time in my life. But I had managed to save just under $4,000. In my family, that was a significant amount of money. I had not told anyone about it. My dad found out anyway. I still don't know how. My best guess is my younger brother mentioned something offhand to my mom, and my mom mentioned it to my dad, and my dad did what my dad always did, which was decide what that money should be used for, before I knew there was a conversation happening. He called me on my lunch break. He said my aunt was having trouble with rent. He said she'd already asked the landlord for an extension, and the landlord wasn't going to give her another one. He said the number they needed was $1,500. He said it like he was telling me the weather forecast. He said, "You've got savings, right?" I didn't say anything for a moment. I was standing outside the clinic, in -15, holding a coffee that had already gone cold, and I was trying to understand the shape of what was happening. Not whether I wanted to help. I always wanted to help, that was the whole problem, but the way he had said it. "You've got savings, right?" Not as a question, as a confirmation of a plan that had already been made. I said, "Dad, that's my emergency fund." He said, "This is an emergency." I said, "For her, not for me." He went quiet. And then he said, in that particular tone he had. Not loud, never loud, just flat and a little tired, like I was disappointing him by making him explain something obvious. "Ren, she's family." That was the whole argument, that was all of it. She's family. As if that answered the question. As if the word itself was supposed to make me open my banking app right there in the parking lot and transfer $1,800 to a woman who had never once, in my entire memory, asked how I was doing without immediately following it up with something she needed. I told him I'd think about it. I went back inside. I sat at my desk and stared at my screen for about 40 minutes and did not actually do any work. That evening, I drove to my parents' house. I hadn't planned to. I think part of me thought that if I could just sit across from him and have an actual conversation. Not over the phone, not through my mom relaying things. Actually face to face. I could make him understand something. My dad was in the living room watching a game. My mom was making tea. My brother was upstairs. It was just us for a few minutes, my dad and me, and I sat down in the armchair across from him, and I said, as calmly as I could manage, "I need to talk to you about the money." He muted the television. That was a good sign, I thought. He was willing to listen. I explained it. I explained that I had spent 2 years being careful. 2 years not going out, not buying things I wanted, packing my lunch every single day, turning down a trip to Montreal with friends because I couldn't justify the cost. I explained that the $4,000 in that account was not extra money. It was the money I was relying on in case I lost my job, in case I got sick, in case something happened. I explained that I wasn't saying no forever. I was saying not right now, not like this, not without being asked. He let me finish, and then he said, "Your aunt has been there for this family." I said, "When?" He looked at me like I'd said something rude. I said it again. I said, "When has she been there for this family, specifically?" Because I'm trying to remember, and I can't. He didn't answer that. Instead, he said I was being selfish. He said I had always been like this. Meaning focused on myself. Meaning unwilling to think about the bigger picture. He said Grandma would be disappointed. And that one landed, because Grandma had died the previous spring, and I had been the one who drove her to her appointments in the last 2 years of her life. And I knew with absolute certainty that she would not have said what he was saying. But I also knew there was no way to argue it. I stood up. My mom came in from the kitchen, cup of tea in both hands, and she looked at my dad and then at me, and she said, "What's happening?" My dad said, "Ren is choosing not to help her aunt." I said, "I'm choosing not to be told what to do with my own money." My mom set the tea down. She looked at me with this expression I still think about. Not angry exactly, more like she was recalibrating something, like she was updating a file she'd had open for years. She said, "Ren, that's a really hard thing to hear from your own daughter." And I understood in that moment that she was talking about my aunt, that her sympathy was for my aunt, that I was, in this equation, the problem. I picked up my jacket. I said, "I have to go." My dad said, "If you walk out now." I said, "I know," and I walked out. I drove home in the dark, on roads still icy from the week before, and I kept waiting to feel something. Regret, guilt, the usual pull that came after any disagreement with my family, that low-grade nausea that meant I'd done something wrong. But it didn't come. What came instead was something quieter, something that felt, and I know this sounds dramatic, like the absence of a sound I'd been hearing so long I'd stopped noticing it. I transferred $500 to my aunt that night. Not feet $800. $500. I sent it with a note that said I hoped it helped. Nobody said thank you. My aunt texted my mom, who texted me. She got it. She said it's not enough. I put my phone down and didn't pick it up again until the next morning. Over the next few weeks, I was mostly left alone. The silence wasn't warm. It was the specific silence of people who are waiting to see what you'll do next. My mom called twice with small updates about nothing. My dad didn't call at all. My aunt sent me a Facebook request, which I ignored, and then a message through my cousin that said she hoped I knew what I'd done. What I'd done. I had thought about that a lot. What I'd done was save money for 2 years, and then not give most of it away to someone who hadn't asked me, herself, for any of it. That was what I'd done. By March, I had made a decision. I don't know exactly when it happened. There wasn't a dramatic moment, no single thing that pushed me over. It was more like I woke up one morning and realized I had already decided. And the deciding had happened quietly while I was sleeping. I wrote a letter, not an angry letter. I'd written those in my head, plenty of them, and they weren't what I wanted to send. I wrote a careful letter. I said I needed some time and space. I said I would reach out when I was ready. I said I hoped everyone was well. I mailed it to my parents. I texted my brother separately because he wasn't part of it, not really. He was 19 and still living at home, and I didn't want him to feel like I was leaving him. Then I changed my phone number, deactivated my Facebook, and started the quietest period of my life. The first few months were strange in a way I hadn't expected. Not painful, exactly, more disorienting. I kept reaching for my phone to call my mom when something funny happened at work, and then remembering. I kept thinking I should visit Grandma's grave on her birthday, and then realizing I'd have to do it alone, and doing it anyway, and standing there in the September cold with a coffee and a handful of wildflowers I'd picked from the side of the road, and talking to her like she could hear me, telling her I was okay. I think she would have believed me. I moved to Ottawa the following year. I'd gotten a job offer. Better title, significantly better pay, a real administrative management role at a medical group practice. I took it. I found an apartment near the Glebe with a window that looked out onto a street lined with maple trees, and I spent the first weekend there unpacking boxes and listening to the CBC, and feeling something that took me a while to name. It was the feeling of a life that was actually mine. I made friends, real ones, not the kind you have because you grew up near each other, but the kind you choose, the kind who show up on a Saturday with a bottle of wine when you text that you're having a bad week. My colleague Beatrix became my closest friend, this loud and specific woman who grew up in Sherbrooke and had strong opinions about everything, from poutine to property tax, and made me laugh until I couldn't breathe. I met my boyfriend, Ethan, at a trivia night at a bar on Bank Street. He was quiet in a way that felt considered, not withholding. We moved in together after a year and a half. I started saving again, properly this time with a financial advisor and a TFSA and an actual plan. By the time I was 29, I had paid off my student debt. By 31, I had a down payment. Ethan and I bought a place in Canada. A little semi-detached, older needed work, but ours. We painted every room. I planted a garden. I learned, slowly and imperfectly, how to be in a family that functioned differently. His parents called on Sunday afternoons to say hello, not to ask for anything, just to say hello. I kept thinking that was going to turn into something. It never did. They just called to say hello. 8 years passed. I'm aware of how that sounds, all at once like that. 8 years, but that's genuinely how it felt. Not like a long wound, more like a chapter. I thought about my family sometimes, the way you think about a city you used to live in. Not with longing exactly, more with a recognition that it shaped you, even the parts you'd rather it hadn't. My brother and I stayed in loose contact. He'd moved to Barrie, gotten work in construction, started dating someone seriously. He was careful about what he told me about our parents, and I was careful about what I asked. We texted on birthdays, and occasionally sent each other stupid memes about hockey. It wasn't much, but it was honest, and I valued it. I had not spoken to my parents in 8 years. Not once. The call I'd been half expecting and half dreading and half convincing myself would never come finally arrived on a Thursday evening in October. Not a call. 52 messages. I had gotten a new phone, a new number, all knew everything, but I'd made a small mistake that I wasn't even aware I'd made. I had used my real name, my full name, on a professional networking profile for a conference I'd attended the previous year. First name, last name, employer, city. Nothing private, just enough. I came home from the gym, poured a glass of water, sat down on the couch, my phone buzzed, and then kept buzzing. 52 messages in the space of about 4 hours, spread across text and email, and one very long voicemail from a number I didn't recognize at first, and then did. My cousin had found the profile. That's what my brother told me afterward. My cousin had shown my aunt, who had shown my mother, who had somehow gotten my email address from a professional inquiry form on my employer's website, who had called a number she found listed under the practice's administrative department. Not my direct line, but close enough that a receptionist who didn't know better had passed along my cell. The messages came in waves, the way they do when multiple people are coordinating without realizing how it looks from the other side. My mother. Ren, it's Mom. I don't know if this is still your number. Please call me when you get this. Then, 20 minutes later, Ren, I just want to know you're okay. Then, an hour after that, your father wants you to know he's not angry. He just wants to talk. My aunt sent 3 messages. They were not apologetic. The first said it had been a long time and she hoped I'd grown up. The second said she'd always known I'd turn out selfish. The third said my grandmother would be heartbroken. I sat there reading them in the order they arrived, which felt important, because they told a story in sequence. My mother starting gentle, then urgent, then quietly accusing. My aunt abandoning any pretense within 3 messages. My cousin sending a long, rambling text about family and forgiveness and what this is doing to your parents, without once acknowledging that she was part of what had happened. My father's voicemail, which was 2.5 minutes long, his voice slightly rougher than I remembered, saying he was proud of everything I'd accomplished, that he'd heard I had a house now, that he thought maybe it was time. He'd heard I had a house now. I played that part back twice. He'd heard I had a house now, after 8 years of silence. Not a birthday card, not a Christmas message, nothing. The thing that prompted contact was the discovery that I owned property. I sat with my phone in my hands for a long time. Ethan was in the other room and I could hear him on his own call. Something about a work project, his voice low and calm. The kitchen smelled like the soup we'd made that morning. The neighbor's kid was shooting a basketball in the driveway next door, that rhythmic thump that I usually find annoying, and that night felt like the most grounding sound in the world. I did not call anyone back that night. What I did instead was open my Noteseats app and start reading. Not the messages. I'd already read those. I started writing down the words that appeared most frequently across 52 messages. I'd spent years working in administrative management. Pattern recognition is actually part of my job. I need was in 17 of the 52 messages. Not I miss, not I'm sorry, I need, I'm sorry appeared 6 times. Always connected to something. I'm sorry, but you have to understand. I'm sorry, but your father is getting older. I'm sorry, but we're family. The word sorry, used as a conjunction. I thought about what I would have needed to hear 8 years ago, if someone had sat across from me and asked. Not money. Not an apology that came with but attached. I would have needed someone to say, we see what you've been carrying, and we shouldn't have let you carry it alone, and we're not calling now because we found out you own a house. None of the 52 messages said that. I talked to Ethan about it the next morning over coffee. He listened the way he always listens, completely, without rushing to fix anything. When I finished, he said, what do you want to do? Not what should you do, what do you want? I said I didn't know yet. He said, that's a fine answer. I waited another week, then I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring. She sounded older. Not fragile exactly, but like time had filed something down. She said my name in a way that didn't have a question mark in it, which was different from how she used to say it, when there was always a small edge of either disappointment or demand underneath. She just said my name. I said, hi Mom. We talked for about 30 minutes. It wasn't dramatic. That's the part that surprised me most. I had been bracing for something operatic, some explosion of emotion or accusation, and instead we talked in a way that was almost careful. She told me about things in Sudbury. I told her I was well. I told her about the house in a general way. I did not tell her about my savings or our financial plan or anything that felt like it belonged to Ethan and me, and not to her. She said, near the end, your father would like to talk to you. I said, I know. I'll think about it. She said, that's all I'm asking. I believed her, and I also knew that it wasn't all she was asking, that underneath the careful voice was 8 years of things unsaid, questions and resentments, and whatever version of missing me she'd constructed in the years I was gone. I wasn't naive about that. I just also wasn't ready to receive all of it at once. I didn't call my father back that week. Or the next. I called my aunt not at all. My cousin sent 2 more messages after the initial wave. I read them and didn't respond. Not out of cruelty. I spent a long time thinking about whether not responding was cruel, and I decided it wasn't, not here. Not to someone whose 3rd message to me after 8 years contained the sentence, "You always were the difficult one." You don't owe a reply to that. What I've been sitting with, in the weeks since, the thing I keep turning over, is not whether to reconnect. I think I will reconnect, slowly, on terms I control. With my mother, maybe with my father. Not with my aunt, not yet, maybe not ever. That's not a dramatic resolution. It's just an honest one. What I keep thinking about is the 8 years themselves. What they were and what they weren't. They weren't a punishment. I know some people frame it that way. Going no contact is a way of making someone suffer, a kind of extended revenge. That's not what it was for me. It was more like what happens when you've been walking around with something digging into your foot for so long. You've just started limping, accepting the limp as your normal gait, and then you stop and take off your shoe and find whatever's been in there. The relief isn't anger. It's just relief. I got to find out who I was when no one was telling me who I was supposed to. That sounds like a therapist quote, and I know it does, and I'm saying it anyway because it's true. I learned that I was not, in fact, difficult. I was not selfish. I was 24 years old, and I had spent a decade functioning as a resource for people who had never once turned the same energy toward me. I also learned, and this took longer, that I was allowed to want things. Not just to survive, not just to manage, but to actually want a life I chose. The house. The garden. Beatrix calling on a Friday afternoon because she found a new taco place on Elgin and did I want to go. Ethan and I deciding, quietly over soup on a Wednesday night, that we were ready to talk about what came next. These are small things. They are enormous things. I don't think I would have let myself have them if I hadn't left. I haven't spoken to my father yet. My mother and I have now talked 3 times. Short calls, careful calls. The kind where you're both paying attention to what isn't being said as much as what is. I don't know what comes next with her. I know I'm not going to rush it. What I know for certain is this. I am not the same person who walked out of my parents' house in February 8 years ago. In the middle of a February that felt like it would never end. That woman was tired and trying not to show it. She was good at showing up for everyone except herself. She had $4,000 in a savings account that the people who were supposed to love her had already decided wasn't hers. She drove home in the dark, on icy roads, and somewhere on that drive she made a choice she didn't even know she was making yet. I'm glad she made it. If you've been counting the messages and wondering whether 52 strangers reaching into your life after 8 years of silence means anything, it does. Just not what they intended it to mean. What it meant to me was confirmation. Confirmation that the distance had been necessary, and that the life I'd built in it was real, and that the people sending those messages were not contacting the person they remembered. They were contacting the LinkedIn profile. The house in Canada. The professional title. And the woman reading those messages was not that girl from Sudbury who kept showing up because she was afraid of what would happen if she didn't. She had somewhere to be, and people who meant it when they asked how she was doing, and a garden that was going to need serious attention come spring. And she was, for the first time in a very long time, exactly where she'd chosen to be,